Welcome to Sterling Visionary Voices, the podcast dedicated to bringing you diverse, innovative leadership insights and actionable strategies for success. Join hosts Laura McNeil and Bob Medeiros as they explore the art and science of role model leadership through thought-provoking conversations with real professionals. Whether you're a seasoned leader or aspiring to excellence, Sterling Visionary Voices is your guide to navigating the complexities of your leadership journey.
Welcome to Visionary Voices. This is host Laura McNeil. The absolute worst life to live is a half-lived one. That's a quote from our previous Visionary Voice episode with Jovan Glasgow. Jovan also emphasized that leaders should focus on capacity and not ability. Ability is the ceiling, the limitations. A leader who focuses on capacity will ignite sparks that motivate others and themselves to create more. A very empowering and enlightening insight to ponder. With us today is Dr. Bob Amason, a retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, a seasoned and well-regarded professor at multiple universities, a consultant at more than 30 organizations where he successfully applied theory to deliberate organizational actions, an award-winning author who writes under the pen name Frank A. Mason, as well as a dedicated Florida Writers Association member and active volunteer and member of the Sons of the American Revolution. Bob has a PhD from the University of Florida. Welcome, Bob. I'm really delighted to spend some time with you today.
Thanks, Laura. I'm looking forward to it.
Wondering if you could share some leadership insights for maintaining quality day-to-day activities while stretching an organization to achieve that capacity like Jovan had referenced?
Yeah, today competes extremely well with tomorrow. That's been a mantra of mine for a long time when it comes to talking about leaders and leadership. And fact is that organizational leaders, the true leaders, the people at the top of the pyramid, should spend a vast amount of their time looking at the future, trying to plan. Conceptually, they should manage the organization for today while planning to change the organization for the future. And one way to focus on this is consider the customer of today versus the customer of tomorrow. We have this problem of thinking the customer is going to stay the same, for example, when in fact that person's needs may change, that person may change, some different person may come along, different organization may come along if you're in the business of serving the needs of other organizations. So are the future customers the same, completely different, or a blend of what we have today? It's difficult to say, and the organizational leader needs to be looking at that. Customers of the present need to be served in real time. They require processes and information flows and an ability to measure the success of both the processes and the information flows. Processes and information flows need improvement to maintain that level of service. Now, this is the day-to-day, right? This is the stuff that the organizational chief leadership of the organization, that they shouldn't be worrying about this day-to-day. Their managers should be. The managers should be worrying about process, information flow, finding ways to improve those things, to identify areas of continuous improvement. And they need to select process improvement efforts and manage those as projects. Projects should be managed with rigor no matter what kind of project it is. And of course, projects have, a defined outcome, a beginning, a middle, and an end, and deliver in a timely manner an outcome, and then the project goes away. And you need known methods to manage those kind of things. And once again, it's managers who should deal with these process improvements. On the other hand, when you go towards strategic direction, the leader of the organization should be focusing in the strategic direction. They should be looking at what will the customer of the future look like? How will I find ways to support that customer? And that means that they need to do strategic market analysis. They have to do a great deal of research to understand that customer. And then they have to lay strategic plans around how to serve that customer. Then they have to structure the organization. Lots of organizations resist the idea of any kind of a restructuring. And there are people in the organizations who say, oh God, there's going to be restructured. That means that my job will go away and so forth. So you have resistance. But senior leadership function should be to find ways to implement new strategic programs and projects. Manage those projects with the same or greater level of rigor than you do for the week, the month to month, day to day process improvement projects. And similar to those process improvement actions, the strategic program and a project needs to be managed with known methods and rigor. And it's important to understand the risks involved with senior leaders not being able to get to the future. In an example from my military days, today competes extremely well with tomorrow, as I said at the beginning of this little discussion. We had, when I was in the military, I was in Hawaii, we had a server room that suddenly was flooded. Well, we had plenty of people who were workers in the process who knew how to get the servers out of there while plumbers were racing to try to shut down the water flow that was flooding out that room. And understandably, everyone was concerned because it had $1 bajillion worth of equipment and so forth in this room. Well, the next thing you know, we had 2-star admirals in their white uniforms and their white shoes walking around in knee-deep water, pulling servers out themselves. And I realized that they wanted to be helpful, but what ended up happening was the skilled technicians basically stood back and watched. Well, those guys that were the 2-star admirals should really have been in a meeting somewhere talking about the future of the command. How are we going to manage the strategy for the Pacific while a bunch of other guys were down there in that water pulling those pieces of equipment off those racks and putting them on a cart and taking them out of arm's way? Didn't happen that way. So that's how today competes with tomorrow. There's always a crisis, and everybody loves a crisis because that's something that they can show their leadership skills and they can go and do their thing. And it also keeps them from having to spend valuable brain cells on what we should be doing for tomorrow.
Today's episode is sponsored by the 32nd Annual Sterling Leadership Conference, happening May 29th through 31st at the Hyatt Regency Orlando. Whether you're a seasoned executive or an aspiring leader, the Sterling Conference promises an extraordinary journey. Don't miss this opportunity to ignite your leadership excellence. Visit thesterlingconference.com to learn more.
Sounds like a lot to focus on. Are there any insights you could offer to help leaders with the execution of this?
Yeah. Everything I mentioned in that first little discussion can be found in the Baldrige criteria. There's sections of the Baldrige criteria about leadership. There's sections about organizational outcomes. There's sections about customers, customer of the present, customer of the future. You can find all of these things, processes, information flows, strategic plans. I think I already mentioned strategic plans, human resources. All of these things are actually in the Baldrige criteria. And I've often told organizational leaders that if they wanted to spend time on a management system, not an award system per se, but a management system, go look at the Baldrige criteria. And then they've said, well, how am I going to measure my success? And I said, well, there's measures in the Baldrige criteria, but you can also go to this tried and true methodology called the balanced scorecard. That was developed in the early 1990s. And the balanced scorecard looks at the same exact things that you find in Baldrige: process efficiency, customer satisfaction, financial performance, employee learning and growth. Now, the interesting thing is that, if you work with a nonprofit, sometimes nonprofits will say, oh, no, we don't need to worry about finance. Well, yeah, you do, because if you don't have money, you don't operate. Government, it is like an ultimate nonprofit. Government without financial performance measures, they end up in trouble too. So these things apply to both profit and nonprofit, volunteer organizations. Um, you mentioned that I'm part of the Sons of the American Revolution. I'm the president of the local chapter. And one thing that we don't have is cash flow. We get some dues every year, and it's not a lot of money. And what am I supposed to do about managing that? So one of the things that I've been working toward is looking at our processes that we have and making sure they're efficient. And looking at customer satisfaction, we have a mission of history, patriotism, and education. And so, how are my people getting to customer satisfaction and educating people about things about the American Revolution and America's patriotism and our grounding in that? And that's all volunteer, and you have to do that without any money, but you still can apply this balanced scorecard. And so, my favorite part of the balanced scorecard really is the concept of employee learning and growth. And if you look at employee learning and growth, that's critical because, to go back to your comment about the earlier podcast and capacity, if you don't invest in people's learning and growth, you will not have the capacity to move forward. You might have enthusiastic people, but if they don't really know uh, the things that they need to know, then they're hamstrung, and then they're frustrated too, right? If you don't train people and you don't provide them the methods and the equipment and the opportunities, um, don't know how you get them to actually be enthusiastic about what they're supposed to do. So those are some things. The balanced scorecard is a very powerful tool. And I often talk about this also in the context of this thing called the learning organization, and the idea that you can extend employee learning and growth to the wider organization and have the organization itself learn and find ways to become a better organization through an introspective um, ability to identify where we need to be and how we need to operate to get there. All of those things I think fit together, and then that cycles right back to customer satisfaction, process efficiency, financial performance, and then back again to employee learning and growth.
Wow, really insightful. Can you come up with an example, perhaps, of where you assisted an organization in a leader-related challenge that leveraged the balanced scorecard?
Yeah, an example that I have is an interesting situation. I've worked with a large insurance company in Texas that they'd probably sue me if I told you the name, but they were a major national insurer, and they ran into a leaderless situation. The CEO had unfortunately fallen ill, and there was churn in the higher ranks about how we would manage the future with regard to customer service, right? So customer satisfaction, customer processes to reach the customer. So there's two of the balanced scorecard right there: the process and the information flows and customer satisfaction. One very senior person, his name was Richard. Uh, he was an advocate, and now this is the late 1990s when the internet was not yet quite the juggernaut that we see today. He was an advocate for taking everything to the web. We can do everything on the web. On the other hand, we had another fellow named Earl that was also a very senior vice president and had been with the company for a great many years. And he had grown up using the telephone, and everything had to go through the telephone. And they were working on this new concept at the time. So many things from so long ago were new concepts, and now I'm old. But the customer relationship management software development, and everyone was trying to find ways to both satisfy the customer as well as to gain wallet share from the customer. If I can get my customer to buy more of my products by satisfying all of their financial needs in one place, that's what I want to do. That was the idea, right? So they wanted to stay with the telephone. That faction wanted to stay with the telephone and the very large and cumbersome call centers, because this would allow for greater customer touch. They thought that the web was not secure, and that you really couldn't touch the customer through the internet. So the battle lines were drawn, and it was a tremendous fight. And it spilled over from the one executive who was absolutely certain that the internet was the way to go, and that phones were very expensive. The internet was cheap. Electrons compete very well with human beings in terms of workers. An electron doesn't ask for a lunch break. You have an internet website, and you don't have to actually pay them, right? On the other hand, the other folks were just, the battle line was drawn. They were insistent on the telephone. Well, the fight got to be really embarrassing, and there was no real referee. And the CEO who was ill retired, and they went and found a new CEO. Now, he was not a favorite of very many people, but one of the things he did was he walked in the door and said, "Okay, this fight is over. What we're going to do here is," it wasn't quite the Solomon, splitting the baby thing. It was, we're going to find a way to do service with the internet and make it secure, and we're going to retain some of the telephonic capability. We'll still look at how we're going to increase our wallet share, both through the internet and on the phone. And by the way, the two guys here that had been having this huge fight, you guys are excused to go to the golf course and sit on your front porch now in your retirement. And they're, "Well, we didn't plan to retire." I said, "Yes, you did." And so they moved on. The organization became better, and many of these things also fell into the category of, it was a huge fight that was overcome by events, because as you know now, some 25 years later, the web is absolutely critical to business, and the security issues have been worked out. But at the time, you had people who could not see the future. They couldn't see the customer of the future. They couldn't see the processes of the future. You had one or two who were visionaries that could do that. They were sidelined and beaten up until we had new leadership step up and say, "This is how we're going to do things, and it is going to include the web."
Great example. Thanks so much for sharing it with us, Bob. Appreciated your time today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Yeah, I'm long-winded. I could talk for days on this.
Well, we'll have to have you back. Thanks again, Bob.
All righty, thanks.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Sterling Visionary Voices, Insights for Role Model Leadership from the Sterling Council. Discover more and connect with us at sterlingvisionaryvoices.com.